wanted to go through some of the questions that I sent you from the bar, but initially I need to, uh, as a matter of procedure, say a couple of things to get your permission for the bar to record all this. Has Ann done this already with you this morning?
No.
Because I was late to the conversation. I didn't know.
Okay. I did not.
Okay. So I'll just go ahead. This is something they typed up and provided me, but it says, I am Dottie Barker, interviewing Billy Cunningham on behalf of the Mobile Bar Association's Archives and History Committee. I'd like to formally obtain Billy's permission to have this interview recorded and transcribed so it can be preserved, edited, and released by the bar for viewing by its members and the public. Do we have your permission, Billy, to
You do, yes.
record? Okay. So I wanted to just start preliminarily with some of the basics of your background. When you were born, where you grew up, when you were admitted to the Alabama State Bar, when you joined the Mobile Bar, started practicing, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail of your military service, your education, your legal work, and that's sort of the categories that I have in my mind that we would cover, and the flow of that information from one point to the next. I'm really going to rely on you because to the extent that you do or don't want to talk about something at any length, I just am going to defer to you. But you see in the document that I sent you sort of the categories of information that the bar finds relevant or that can be interesting for these types of discussions. So initially, if you'll just give me some of your background generally, and then we'll get into more of the specifics.
All right. Well, I was born December the 14th, 1947 in Mobile. We lived there basically until Daddy was in the Army, so during Korea, but we lived there until I was 10 years old when I moved to Jackson, Alabama. We moved to Jackson, Alabama, where I ended up meeting my wife, Kathy, in the 10th grade when she moved there. And we graduated from high school there. And then I went to Sewanee. And then I came back home and taught school one year and lived at home and decided it's time for me to get off my rear end. And I applied to law school, joined the Marine Corps, and what else you need to know, Dottie, about?
Well, it sounds like a
Then you
good
want to
jumping
then
off.
well, here's what happened. Let me see if I can summarize it. I went to OCS before I went to law school, was commissioned a second lieutenant. They put me on inactive reserve status for 3 years while I went to law school, which was during Vietnam. So when I got out at the very end of Vietnam, about 6 or 7 months before it was over, so I didn't have to go. Marine Corps sent me to what they call the basic school, where I learned to be an infantry officer for about a year, because all Marines are riflemen first and whatever else second. And then I went to justice school, toughed out the summertime in Newport, Rhode Island. And then I had the tough duty station of being in San Diego, California at the recruit depot for 3 years, where I tried cases as a defense counsel, a trial counsel, the chief military officer. And then I resigned from the Marine Corps and came back to Mobile in 1978.
And you started practicing in Mobile in 78?
I started in 78 with the firm of Sense, Pike, Campbell, and Duke is what it was called then. And I was primarily an insurance defense firm, and did a lot of products liability there for 12 and a half years, and really enjoyed the people I was practicing with and the type practice that we had. It was very high level. We tried a lot of cases. We lost a lot of cases. We won a few cases. And then in 1991, I joined Pete Burns and Pete Mackey and what became Burns, Cunningham, and Mackey.
Let me ask you quickly before we talk about your legal career in more depth. Did you have any family members who
No,
practiced?
my father was a first level foreman with a telephone company. My mother, my mother, well, four of us. I had a sister and two brothers. And my mother worked as a seamstress at Vanity Fair plant in Jackson, even though she was valedictorian of her high school class in Mobile. She went to work. So I had no family members. Robert Cunningham was my dad's first cousin, but no immediate. And I had a great uncle who became a judge out in Texas, but none of my family were lawyers.
Why'd you go to law school after you taught for a year? Why
Well,
that particular decision, I guess, is what I'm
I
asking.
thought I thought when I was a senior in college, I was going to play some professional baseball, but my draft number was 26. And that's not the baseball draft, that's the military draft. So I didn't know what to do. I thought about getting a master's in history or maybe becoming a priest. And none of those sounded like what I wanted to do. And so I went to home and I just all of a sudden I just decided I needed to be a lawyer. I thought it would be interesting. My father, as a first level foreman, was between management and the unions, and he hated it. He hated dealing with other people in big companies, and that probably influenced me more than anything else. So I figured if I was a lawyer, I could be independent and I wouldn't have somebody telling me what to do all the time. So that probably was the biggest influence on it.
Did that come to fruition? Is that what you experienced as a
Oh
lawyer?
yeah, yeah. When I started applying for jobs, I stayed away. I didn't apply for to any of the big firms in Mobile at all. I wanted a small firm. I didn't want to get involved in bureaucracy. I had enough. That was pretty good bureaucracy in the Marine Corps there for a while too. So
Hmm. So it sounded like you had a pretty good thing going at the Sense Campbell Duke firm for 12 and a half years. Why'd you leave it? Or did you leave it?
well, I did leave it. Pete Burns and I and his wife Renee and Kathy and I were just good friends. We became good friends through handball and similar interests. Renee being a nurse, Kathy being a doctor. And we did a lot of things together. And Pete just kept pounding on me that I needed to be on the other side of the bar. And he asked me 3 different times before I finally decided he was right. And what happened was I was having insurance adjusters telling me how to try cases, settling cases out from under me that needed to be tried, making me try cases that I was going to get waxed in, and they were auditing our bills, and I just had enough. And Pete happened to call me right in the middle of one of those times, and I said, "Yes, sir, I'm on my way." And during that time, I started representing some plaintiffs in some nursing home cases, and I also had one client that was sending me all over the country, suing people, defending them, taking depositions. And so I had a client that I could take with me, and it worked out. And so off I went.
This is an unusual question, but do you remember what you were first paid as a lawyer, either in the military or at the Sense Campbell firm?
Well, I remember my payment as a captain in the Marine Corps was pretty good. Uh, when we came back to Mobile, my salary was $12,000 in 1978. Kathy wasn't working. We had been living on a captain's salary and a doctor's salary for a couple of years, and now I think I figured out we were about a fourth of our income when we came back to Mobile.
Wow, 1978. Did she go back to work after that point?
We had 2 babies. We had Elizabeth and Ann. Ann was just 6 or 8 weeks old when we came back, and your age and classmate.
Yep.
In in March or April of 79, no, let me think, of 80. She went to work part-time at a doctor's office for a little while, and then she got a residency at South. And so for 2 years, she was gone every third night, came home at 6 o'clock, maybe on the other night, and went to bed, and had one night when it was a kind of a normal life, I guess. And so I got real close to Elizabeth and Ann. We became very good friends. Thank goodness.
Yeah. And I remember from when I worked at Burns, Cunningham, and Mackey with you and Pete Burns and Pete Mackey that Kathy and Renee were involved in the practice in the sense that medical cases that needed expert opinions or some medical providers' input, you and Pete Burns were able to get Kathy or Renee's input, or at least you had that that expertise available to you. How did that come about? How did Renee and Kathy?
Well, Renee worked at the University of South Alabama, and right when computers were starting, and became a computer programmer. And then Pete kind of stumbled around the handball court one day and broke his ankle. And so he was laid up in bed, and Pete, he got into computers. And so Renee and Pete knew all about computers, and Renee knew some medicine, and Kathy knew some medicine. So when Kathy, she did it a little bit when she was working, but when she retired in 2004, then she was able to review cases for us regularly, and went to depositions with us and passed me notes about what to ask and how to ask it. Very helpful, yes. And helped us call out a lot of cases that we were being sent, without having to spend any money. I just fed us supper,
That's really convenient. Having spent, I don't even know, 15 years in the medical malpractice field, at this point, I know that those expert opinions and the involvement of experts from the get-go are priceless in terms of, like you said, culling out cases and supporting the good cases. What was it like essentially practicing law with your wife, even though she's, more of an expert or consultant role?
It would, on occasion, it would get frustrating because she would have such a deeper knowledge of the case that I was trying to depose these doctors and these experts on. And she would try to pass me a note to tell me what I was trying to ask. And generally, often in a deposition, we would just stop and go outside, and she would write the question out for me so that I ask it exactly correctly, because if I didn't, the witness could skirt on me. And so, that was very helpful. But we would get into some arguments here and there, but we worked out pretty well. 51 years worth, so I guess we're okay.
Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. So it's a little bit related to what we're talking about, but sort of tangentially. But do you remember any particularly tough cases or people or clients that you dealt with over the course of your legal career that stand out as something worth noting? Something that's something or someone.
That question is on your little outline here. And I got to thinking about it, and I'm glad you asked that question, because as a defense lawyer, when I was a young lawyer, it seemed like, Cunningham bound and that group of lawyers was always on the other side, or on a lot of our cases. And we were all the same age.
Mhm.
I had great respect for every one of them, probably tried a case against every one of them. I don't think I ever tried a case with Bobo, who's my second cousin. And we had some cases, but never went to trial. So that group as a defense lawyer, always stands out, good lawyers. I jotted down some names. Fred Killian, Dick Vollmer, Michael Knight, was some of the older lawyers that were just professional. I mean, they just did everything right, and you could talk to them. You didn't have to argue with them. You could lay things out, and they could lay things out. And then some more lawyers my age. Always loved dealing with Charlie Fleming because he had such a sense of humor. Just about any case you were involved in. We tried a case one time when Charlie was having diarrhea, and we were in front of Clarence Galanos was the judge, and Charlie would raise his hand, and Judge Galanos would call a recess, and Charlie would go to the bathroom. But I always liked dealing with him. And Cooper Thurber, your partner, Mr. Baker, was always a delight to work with. Most of my nursing home cases in Mobile were with what was it called then? Helen Alford and Davis Carr. Charlie Potts was in that firm for a while. Bunch of good lawyers over there that defended those cases. They were a pleasure.
When all- Mhm.
So, good relationship with a lot of lawyers. I'll pass on some of the ones that are on my list here that I've been keeping for several years, maybe about 40 years.
What about some notable judges or memorable judges or experiences with judges?
Well, again, I'm glad you asked about that too. When in the Marine Corps, I tried I played 52 jury cases in the Marine Corps. And when we had motion docket, we had to wear what's called the Charlie uniform with a tie and a coat, and very formal. It was like an appellate argument. My first Friday at Pike, Campbell and Duke, Pete Sents hands me the motion docket and says, no, the secretary said, Mr. Sents wants you to go down and handle these motions. There's nothing to do, just find the lawyers and get it passed. Oh, gee, I didn't know anybody, hardly knew anybody. I went down and the first courtroom I went into was Judge Bowling. And I happened to remember that Cooper Thurber was arguing the motion, and Judge Bowling had a stack of files on his desk, of one file, this thick, just big thing. And they were arguing, and all of a sudden, Judge Bowling stood up. He was a little bitty short guy, and he stood up and he hit that stack, and he said, "You see this SHIT?" And everybody in the courtroom stopped. He said, "That little piss out next door," talking about Judge Hocklander, "gives me all these cases, and I didn't know what I'd gotten into." But Judge Bowling was very fair, and he was a great judge. Another good one was I walked in Judge Bird's courtroom one time. I was the first one in there at 9 o'clock. He walked out on the bench. Nobody else was in there. He called a docket, called a couple of cases, and then he said, "What case are you here on, Billy?" And I said, whatever it was. "All motions are denied." And he stormed off the bench because no lawyers were there.
Yeah.
I won. I was defending the motion. But he was a good judge. Judge McDermott was always fair. He put his glasses down like this and look over his glasses at you, and you just didn't know whether to squirm or leave the courtroom. Judge McRae was Judge McRae, okay? And sometimes he could be as ornery and as nasty, but Judge McRae liked lawyers and protected lawyers, and I tried a number of cases in front of him, some good, some bad, but he just would be difficult sometimes, but he was a good judge too, I guess. Got reversed a lot, but anyway.
Yeah, I actually have a couple of his cases. Shockingly, I've been doing some work for death row prisoners, and some of his cases are cases that I am still appealing. Um, what about the practice of law generally that stands out in your mind as something that has evolved since you began practicing? You mentioned earlier Pete Burns and technology, and I know
Yeah,
that.
and that's one thing I wrote down is computers. Our firm was really on top of it more than anybody else. I can remember going to a deposition with Ed Sledge, and I opened up my computer, my laptop, and it went ding ding to whatever it did back in those days coming on. And Ed said, "What is that? Are you recording it?" I just looked at him and grinned. I said, "No, I'm not recording." But because of computers have changed the practice of law. Um, you can do so many things. I had to relearn the typing skills that I learned back in high school. Thank goodness I took typing in high school. Took typing instead of physics. I just think it's actually a pretty good move on my part.
Probably, yeah.
Um, but that, when I also in the Marine Corps, we would have voir dire. When I came to Mobile, you didn't have voir dire. The judges did all the voir dire until people started filing motions and they finally realized how important that was. So that changed. The person, I don't know if it's as much the pandemic, but the last few years, last 20 years, last 20 years, less individual contact, it seems, with lawyers. Maybe that's because there's more of us. And you didn't deal with, I didn't deal with Michael Knight 2 or 3 times a year anymore. Maybe I'm dealing with somebody from Birmingham, or I'm dealing with somebody from Baldwin County, or, and so that's changed. There's more lawyers, so you don't get that rapport that maybe you had before when there were fewer of us. And then I everybody talks about young lawyers and Rambos. I get frustrated sometimes with young lawyers, and when I think back, well, I probably frustrated some older lawyers myself. I'll tell you this story, and I won't tell you who the lawyer was. They were taking depositions in this. The defense there were like 6 defendants, and taking depositions in this case. Boy, they was long, stupid depositions. I thought inane questions. Saturday morning of Wimbledon, Serena's going for number whatever, and they taking a deposition, and I wanted to watch anyway. The young lawyer was starting to ask these stupid questions, and finally she asked my client, who was a young man, 16 years old, 17 years old, what computer games he played. I objected rather strenuously and told him how stupid I thought it was, and I'm sitting here during Wimbledon listening to you ask questions that had nothing to do with this case, and I'm going to walk out of here before I get real mad, and I'm going to come back in and we're going to start this deposition again, and you're going to please ask relevant questions. And I got up and walked out before I did something really stupid. And she did come back and start, anyway, so that's been a difference too. Just maybe getting old and not as patient as they used to be.
Tell me about a particular case that stands out in your mind, or outcome of a case that stands out in your mind that's notable in some form or fashion.
Well, the first one in the Marine Corps, I defended a drill instructor who was accused of killing a recruit with a pugil stick in the training process. National news, national attention. They had my picture on the morning show. I mean, nobody interviewed me, but I was a new kid on the block, so I got the main defendant. They pressed charges against the staff sergeant, against his gunnery sergeant, against his captain, against his lieutenant colonel, and against his colonel. and against another sergeant. I had the bad guy, supposedly. And anyway, I was smart enough to realize I probably shouldn't be handling this by myself. So I got a retired major out of the Marine Corps who had been a lawyer in the Marine Corps. And he and I tried that case and we had him acquitted. That was a big deal. I got a big picture of me with him and the San Diego News saying Sergeant MCRD drill instructor acquitted, big deal. The next one, well, I lost a big case to Buddy Brown and John Crowder. They hit us for $3.5 million on a bad faith claim when bad faith was just getting started.
Wow.
And I thought maybe I needed to quit practicing law after that one. I remember going to church at St. Paul's and the next Sunday and going up to the communion rail thinking everybody in the congregation was looking at me thinking I was the stupidest lawyer in the world. They probably didn't care, could have cared less.
Probably had no idea.
It wasn't any fun. But when we appealed that case, Mary Beth Manaply was working with us. And Mary Beth happened to call somebody in Montgomery and who told them that one of the justices on the Supreme Court had his own two bad faith cases pending, and what was he doing sitting on the case and writing the opinion. In fact, this was on the rehearing. They just affirmed the verdict.
Mm-hmm.
So we filed a motion to recuse him, and they denied it. And we appealed it got to the Supreme Court on a lack of due process and on punitive damages. Only a $1,600 bill, $1,600 bill. And the Supreme Court ruled that he should have disqualified himself. That was fascinating. We hired a firm, and Pete Sense and I tried that case. Oh, Pete Sense tried the case. I was with him. Oh no, Pete Sense and I tried that case. And Pete said he didn't want anything to do with it. So I got to work on the appeal. Pete did, I worked with this law firm, big law firm in Washington. Ted Olson, who was Solicitor General later, was the head lawyer on it. And I spent a week in Washington before, working on the briefs and everything before. The week before the case was to be heard by the Supreme Court, we spent every day practicing oral arguments. And then had oral arguments for the Supreme Court the next week. Big deal. Supreme Court said he should have recused himself, sent it back. Alabama Supreme Court, who reduced the verdict to $500,000. If that was tried in 1981, and I think it was finally resolved in 1985. So that was an interesting case. And then my nursing home cases were always very important cases to me. That was primarily what I did. I'll tell you one funny story. Did you know Willie Jones, the man that would detail our cars? Was he still around when you were with us? Do you remember him? You would have remembered him, okay?
I remember that activity that would happen in the parking lot. I personally don't believe I ever met him.
Willie was a detail. The way we got to know Willie was, what was his name? Anyway, I got referred a case while I was at Sims Campbell, and about a man that had choked on a sausage egg biscuit sandwich at McDonald's. And he kept the sample and had titanium in it, and you had these pictures of all this nasty looking metal that got caught in his throat. And Willie couldn't eat. He was having a tough time. I put him on the witness stand, and he was doing real well until I asked him to relive what had happened when he choked on his sandwich. And when I did, he went into a catatonic trance. He started shaking. He was on the stand just shaking like this. Oh, Mr. Cunningham, oh, Mr. Cunningham. So Judge Hodnett was the judge. He called a recess. He got the jurors out there and went back in his office with Willie and trying to calm him down because we were doing real well. He ended up going to the psychiatric ward for 7 or 8 weeks or something. And they had all that in the judge's care, a mistrial, of course, before we left. And Reggie Copeland and Charlie Potts were defending the case. And Reggie said, "Billy, you were searing in your direct examination." Thanks a lot, Reggie. But anyway, that was a good story. That was an interesting thing. All right.
Well, look, you talked earlier about Kathy and about your relationship with your girls, your first two anyway, while she was practicing, and how that affected y'all, your family, your relationships. How did your practice of law affect your family? I mean, having spent, time with you litigating, I know that it can be all consuming. It can be incredibly distracting when it comes to everything outside of work. But you in particular, how has your practice affected your family?
Well, I hope it hasn't. I know sometimes I'll go off on trips and I'll have my computer and they'll get mad at me because my daddy's on his damn computer again. And that's true. I was pretty bad about that. But I was able to, I made myself coach softball, as you know, one of my star players, Dottie. And the girls, all three of the girls played sports. And I made all their games because my father made all my high school baseball games. And then Kathy would just, luckily my parents lived in Fairhope at the time. So if we got into a real pinch, we had them. And then at some point, Frank came back to town and practiced law. And my other brother, King, lived over in Fairhope. So we had family support. But yeah, I got a little into it too much. And, when you're trying a case, as you know, it's got to be all consuming. You can't do anything else. You got to get it done.
Well, along those lines, and looking at it retrospectively, what advice would you give to young lawyers getting into the practice of law regarding that catchphrase, work-life balance, and making decisions as a lawyer, litigator or not, regarding balancing family and work?
Well, you need to have support. You can't do it all yourself. Either your partners or your spouse or somebody's got to help you do it. You try to do it. I don't see how people practice law by themselves. Having somebody you can go to bounce things off, having a spouse or a significant other these days that can take some of the other issues you have in your life going on off your plate. You just got to have it, I think.
Billy, are you retired?
Am I?
Yes. Are you retired?
Yes, I have. I have one pro bono case that I'm doing for our former housekeeper who died, and the bank, it looks like, cashed 5 of her checks after she died that she didn't write. And I got the pro bono case. I'm getting ready to file it. I have a class action case against Facebook out in California that has settled. We had the hearing a week or so ago. We're waiting for the judge to issue the order. I'm just waiting for that order to come in and then the fees to come in on that. And that is it.
So why are
I
you?
may have my own lawsuit here before too long with my hurricane damage, but
Oh, well,
yeah.
yeah. I've been representing a client since September of 2020 on Hurricane Sally damage. So good luck to you.
That's mine.
Yeah. So why are you in the process of retiring?
I just had enough. It was just time. It was time, as you said, like I said, all consuming. I don't know if I want to stay up all week, work all week or 2 weeks in a case and be up at night. Physically, I don't know if that's a good thing for me. I had a lot of fun doing it. I enjoyed doing it. I just don't, it's interesting. I have a real good friend I was in the Marine Corps with who said he's gonna die in the courtroom. Well, he can have it. That's, that is not my goal in life. I've got, we moved and we're up
Mhm.
here in Chattanooga with our youngest daughter, Mary Catherine, who had a baby Friday.
Congratulations.
So, we have two grandsons here in Chattanooga and two in Ohio with Elizabeth and two in Tampa with Ann. And I want to spend much time as I can with them. And then Kathy wants to direct me on how to live my life. And so I figure I'll give her a chance for a few years. Just walked in.
It's a give and take, right? Y'all,
Yeah, it's a give and take. I had to sacrifice some things when she was on call or doing things and maybe I couldn't make a trip or a deposition. Somebody else had to go for me but that's just the way it goes.
so this isn't part of the outline, but I wanted to tell you that I appreciated you giving me an opportunity to work with you and having hired me back in, oh, whatever that was, 2009 or 10 or something.
Well, Dottie, you set new law in Mississippi with the Dottie Barker estate succession law and your oral argument up there on that case.
Yeah, I remember what stands out to me in oral argument in front of the Supreme Court of Mississippi was, Ms. Barker, why has this lawsuit been pending for 10 years?
Yeah, yeah.
And I just look at you, I just turn around and look at counsel table. Because of course, I hadn't been practicing law, when the case was originally filed and it was a nursing home case, it was Yarborough.
Nursing home case, yeah. And I can't remember if they changed lawyers or I don't remember if Hurricane Katrina had something to do with it. Just all different things. But anyway, it had been around a while.
That was an experience. And literally having to just turn around and look at you because of all the preparation I had done and we had put into it. That was not a question I was even remotely prepared to answer. So I appreciate you backing me up and being with me during that whole process and allowing me to argue it. I was a 2-3 year lawyer.
Good job. Did a good job. Did a better job than I would have done.
Well, it was fun. I enjoyed it and I appreciate you having given me all the opportunities that you did while I practiced with you. I enjoyed practicing law with you, Billy.
We had a good time.
All right. Well, I think that we've covered the finer points of your practice, your background, your professional and personal histories. Is there anything that you want to talk about or tell me about that I haven't asked you about?
No, I will say this about my practice. I was lucky to have practiced with lawyers that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
At both firms that I was in, there were lawyers that I liked as human beings a lot and respected a lot. My Marine Corps cohorts, same way. So through that, I got to meet a lot of nice people, do a lot of interesting things, and practice of law is so diverse, so many different things going on. You get in products cases that have issues and medical cases with issues and automobile cases with different issues and people. It's just a wonderful profession. I enjoyed it.
It's never dull. Are Pete Burns and Pete Mackey still practicing?
Pete, yeah, they both are. Pete is slow. Pete Burns says he's slowing down, but I don't really believe him.
Is he capable?
Yeah, we'll see what he does. Pete Mackey says he's going to do it another 10 years, 7 or 8 years or so. He's with Troy, and Troy's come along wonderfully, and the two of them are thinking about what they're going to do together and how they're going to do it. So yeah, they're still going.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. They do good work. I enjoyed working with all of y'all.
It was
Do you
fun.
you ever run into Clay Rossi?
The only one I need some really smart answer to a legal question, I will contact Clay. How's he doing? Do you see him?
I do. He is at the DA's office doing white or criminal prosecution, and it is right up his alley.
Yeah.
He's the only one in that division, and so he is his own boss and has more work than he can say grace over, but he does enjoy it, and he keeps very busy, and he gets very excited, as he tends to do, about all of his cases. So he's, I think, well suited for that position. But
Well, he's smart, and he knows more about conflicts of law than anybody I've ever talked to. It
yeah,
was- when we had the McSween case, you know, where the
yes,
awning rod went through her face,
yes.
we had major conflicts of law issues in that case that Clay was just right on top of.
Mhm.
That was good.
It's definitely good for all those esoteric, complicated aspects of law that, yeah, that pop up occasionally. Well, I appreciate your time. I know that I took up a lot of it yesterday and today, but I'm glad to hear and see that you're doing well, that your family is doing well, that you got six, did you say grand boys? You got
No, I've
six?
got 4 grandsons, 2 granddaughters.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So, you know, having raised 3 girls, the boys are kind of an interesting.
That's exciting. That's a
project.
challenge for you.
They're different.
Well, look, tell Kathy I said hello and your girls as well when you see them.
Will
But
do, brother.